call Miss Edge to ask her urgent question. Please.
Thank you, Mr President. I'd like to ask the Minister for Health and Social Care if he will make a statement on the capacity of Merseyside North West England Hospital Trusts to continue to provide intensive care treatment for Manx residents in light of the recent COVID-19 pressure on the NHS in England. Thank you, Mr President.
Before I call on the Minister, honourable members, you may remove jackets if you wish to be more comfortable. I call on the Minister for Health and Social Care to reply. Mr Ashford.
Thank you, Mr President. Merseyside and North West England Hospital Trusts continue to provide intensive care unit and intensive treatment unit beds as required to Isle of Man patients. Since March 2020 to date and through the first wave of the COVID-19 pandemic, this represents a relatively low proportion of activity. The Department worked closely with Merseyside and North West England Hospital Trusts on a daily basis to accommodate patients based on clinical priority and need, on the same basis as patients resident in England. Merseyside and North West England Hospital Trusts have not refused any air ambulance patient transfer, which we are aware of since March 2020, requiring off-island ICU or ITU bed in Merseyside and North West England. If Merseyside and North West England reach full capacity and were unable to accept a patient requiring an off-island ICU or ITU bed, contingencies would take effect to strengthen resilience and capacity both on and off island. This would involve increasing and expanding ICU capacity on island, as happened during the first wave of the COVID-19 pandemic. The Department would also utilise its wider off-island hospital networks for emergency transfers requiring ICU, ITU beds as appropriate. This would be supported by the Isle of Man Air Ambulance, which has the ability to transfer patients to any part of the United Kingdom. Nobles Hospital will continue to work closely with Merseyside and North West England Hospital Trusts on a daily basis to ensure that ICU and ITU beds are prioritised based on clinical priority and need. Thank you, Mr President.
Supplementary question, Ms Edge.
Thank you, Mr President. I thank the Minister for that answer. I appreciate that the Minister has advised that there's been no issue and no individual from the Isle of Man's been refused beds. What I didn't hear the Minister say is that there's a guaranteed system in place. The Minister said that you work closely, you said that there's not been an issue, but is there a contract in place for the people of the island to receive this critical care when required, and what is the capacity within that contract? Thank you, Mr President.
Minister to reply.
Thank you, Mr President. We can never guarantee anything because the hospitals themselves have to ensure they can treat their own patients. But what we have is a network throughout the entire United Kingdom that we can call on. I mentioned in the original answer, Mr President, around the fact that it represents a relatively low proportion of activity. So, for instance, this year so far, there's been less than 5 air ambulance patient transfers. And generally for ITU beds and ICU beds, the demand is relatively low that we have to transfer people to the UK. It is only in the more extreme circumstances. And as I stated in the original answer, Mr President, we can go back to what we did with our COVID regime, where we can double our ICU capacity on Ireland if required.
Honourable Member for Ramsey, Dr Allinson.
Thank you, Mr President. Would the Honourable Member agree with me that the decision to admit somebody to an intensive care bed is intrinsically a clinical decision made by doctors on the ground? And would he also join me in congratulating the staff at Nobles Hospital, who during the lockdown and the first wave of the pandemic went above and beyond duty, both to increase the capacity but also the skills necessary to look after critically ill patients on Ireland? Thank you.
Minister to reply.
Thank you, Mr President. I fully agree with the Honourable Member for Ramsey, Dr Allinson. It is a clinical decision as to what treatment is required and whether someone is admitted. Equally, I've got to say the entire staff across DHSC, across all roles, went way beyond what is normally required of them day to day. People were learning new skills very fast, be that in ICU or in fact even in oncology and other areas, to ensure that Isle of Man patients didn't have to rely on being transferred across but could receive treatments on Ireland. So I'd like to give a great tribute to all of the staff across DHSC and of course wider in the third sector as well, who did a lot of our community work that without whom we wouldn't have been able able to be in the position that we are today.
Final supplementary, Miss Edge.
Thank you, Mr President. I too concur with everything that's been said about our fantastic health service on the Isle of Man. The Minister did just include in their oncology services, and he also said that the numbers are relatively low outside of the 5 air ambulances. What you didn't say is what the numbers are, and if you do have that information, it would be appreciated. But with regards to oncology and cancer services, there was disruptions during COVID the last time. Can the Minister assure me that there'll be no further disruption, or I know it'll be difficult for the Minister to answer this, but what has he done to ensure that anybody that's requiring treatment for, say, cancer are treated as a priority, because some of those will be in need of possible intensive care treatment?
Minister to reply.
Thank you, Mr President. Well, the actual figure the honourable members after is 5. I did actually state that the number of patients requiring an ICU, ITU bed that have been transferred this year into the northwest of England is 5. In terms of oncology and cancer treatments, it is an easy question for me to answer, in the fact that I can't give any guarantee. We're in the middle of a worldwide pandemic, Mr President, and obviously UK hospitals are having to make decisions about what services they can actually offer at any given time. But what I can reassure the honourable member on is that we did an excellent job during the pandemic of gearing up our services and being able to try and provide excess services compared to what we normally would on Ireland. And if that is required, we will look to do so again. And I'm sure the staff, who did an absolutely excellent job across DHSC in that regard, will actually step up to the mark again if required.